So good evening, welcome, and good morning. Welcome to our call today. Uh, Joe said he'd be late. I think Manu could be here, and John sent a confirmation that he would be here today. So we'll see what happens, and we're going to begin our meeting. Anne, how are you feeling, and what do you expect to get out of today?
I'm chilling today, relaxing. And it's something that I'm told I have to be mindful of doing. So yes, that's what I'm doing. So that's how I feel right now. And looking forward as usual to our discussion and continuation of the book, and also to look at the parts I missed last week. Yeah. Richard, how do you feel, and what would you like to take away today?
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling pretty good. We're in the middle of quite a big snowfall. It's not a stormy snowfall, but it's just steady snowfall. So it's winter wonderland. Just when we thought maybe the season was going to turn in the direction of spring, but not in the last couple of days. And this morning I just came off of our Trim Tab book club meeting, and we started to review a new book called The American Dreamer, who was written by an American, but I don't know if he's still there, but he ended up in a university, I believe, in New Zealand. Um, and it's really quite an enlightening kind of book because he's been able to take um, uh, an understanding of an awful lot of Fuller's writings, Critical Path being one of them, and being able to select different kinds of passages and put them in what he's trying to write about. And he really, the very beginning is very interesting because, well, two things. One is that he he said, so wouldn't it be interesting to have a special symposium with people from speaking from all the um, kind of domains or areas that Fuller has been described as being. So, an architect, a poet, a science person, um, and to put them together to explain to, if you want, any audience, lay audience, what Fuller was all about. So this morning I was suggesting that we should, as a group, name those people that we would recommend or name to speak on behalf of one of these sort of areas. And a number of names were coming up, which was kind of interesting fairly quickly. But the other one was uh, in the context of today's world events. He talked an awful lot about how the native people of North America, on the East Coast, basically, New York and up into Canada, the Mohawk Iroquois people, and the influence they had on building the U.S. Constitution and the whole idea of a confederacy and working together. But one of the really disturbing things that he cited, I've never really heard it that way, is that after all this was done with the help of the native people, then George Washington at a certain point ordered the native people to be exterminated. um, and so if that's all true, um, then what a blight on the character of the person that is revered as sort of the founding of the new nation of the United States of America. Very disturbing. And of course, in today's world of all the conflicts going on, the idea of genocide and extermination of those you don't want to be around is in the forefront, and to th and to think that somebody of the stature of Washington um, was party to this same kind of behavior way, way back when is really, anyway, was really disturbing. And
Yeah.
so uh, I guess what I want to get out of our discussion is more of the understanding of the philosophy of Fuller and why he wrote the way he did, and his consistent message of livenry over weaponry. And that's obviously the area that I think all of us on these kinds of calls I wanted to see more of. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of what we're going to do today. And so back to you, Steve, in terms of how are you feeling and what are you wanting to get out of today?
Well, I'm so glad that you said everything you said, and it caused me to go out and do some research. First thing I want to share is that we got our snow today too. It started to be more and more spring-like. There's at least an inch of snow out in those trees out there as I look through the window. And I was with my family today for a birthday with my grandson. It started a blizzard. I walked out and the wind was the wind was blowing the snow so vigorously, it was absolutely difficult to even keep my eyes open.
Mm,
It was something. And now that I'm home, it looks like the streets are not yet covered. As I drove in, they were quite slushy, but not covered. The snow was just starting to settle on top of the slush, but it looks to me like we don't have snowpack on the roads here. But we were up for warning today. Now, regarding your other comments, Richard, being that I'm a great defender of America, is that I've actually studied the United States Constitution, the Great Treaty of Peace from the Iroquois.
yeah.
And the Iroquois Federation of the Iroquois and their Great Treaty of Peace was a model for the Constitution. The idea of the
Mm.
Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate were the women, and the House of Representatives were the men, and the women would get together and decide what to do, and then the men would execute what the women wanted them to do. But the Great Treaty of Peace, that's all broken out in this book here, the Iroquois had a written language, which if you ask a American if the Indians had a written language, they would tell you no. So we, and according to a Native American tradition, um, as you stated, there was a federation of five Iroquois, or five tribes that were part of the Iroquois, the Mohicans, I think, and I'm not clear on all of them, but they made that coalition, and the U.S. modeled its constitution after that. And I never learned about that in high school. We have the eagle, which
Yeah.
is a Native American bird, right? We got the eagle as a national bird. The eagle is holding 13 arrows representing the 13 colonies. Those things we learn about.
Yeah.
But to learn about the fact that our Constitution was established on a written document held by the Native Americans is just not part of the American history. And yet it's true.
Mm.
Now, you said some other things too, and so I did some quick research, and I just want to report to you that here we go. Do you know that George Washington, aka Town Destroyer, ordered the massacre of Native Americans? No, he didn't. That was just a story someone made up a few decades ago to demonize him by altering history. However, the Indian Removal Act, the actual Indian Removal Act, which was about destroying Native Americans, was signed by Andrew Jackson in May of 1830. In fact, what I've learned is that Andrew Jackson actually started scalping, and the Native Americans scalped in defense because the French and the Americans were paying people to bring back scalps to proving they'd killed Native Americans. So it was Andrew Jackson who promoted the scouting or the scalping. Then it said down here, what did George Washington do about the Native Americans? As a landowner, he constantly sought to expand his holdings with Native American land, claiming or buying large tracts and then fighting protracted battles to prove the deeds he held were legitimate. As commander of the Continental Army, he ordered the destruction of indigenous communities when it helped the American cause. So I think that the actual nature of George Washington's involvement needs to be researched a little bit further. Although I do know that I had heard from there's a historian, a Tom something, that as soon as the Americans got together and decided that they were going to break away from England, George got on his horse and went as far east as he could to make sure that the Montclair, I think, or whatever his tract of ground was there was as big as it could possibly be. So I do know that he was aggressive when it came to owning land. So, but the actual whether he ordered extermination of Native Americans or not, I'm going to hold that aside, and we're going to see what happens. So there's
Yeah,
my.
I'm just going to find as we're talking, I'll find the reference in the text and see if there's a reference to.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I think that the real history, if you remember, Howard Zinn wrote a book called The People's History of America. I think it was called People's History of America. Let me do that really quickly. And what he did was he completely rewrote People's History of the United States. And he did a history of the United States based on documents of letters between different people. So instead of relying on the standard picture of history, he went right to documents and built a history based on the communications of people. Here's a little thing. Every work of history, according to Howard Zinn, is a political document. He titled his thick survey A People's History so that no potential reader would wonder about his own point of view. With all of its limitations, it is a history disrespectful of government and respectful of people's movements of resistance. So, and I know that Howard Zinn's book is well respected among rebels. I haven't read it myself, but have a lot of respect for it. So, if you can find that reference, bring it up anytime. Okay, regarding our expectations for tonight, I've really enjoyed the last couple of weeks of our things, and last week was really, really good. We went through profit, we went through class 2 evolution and class 1 evolution in a little bit more detail, and then we ended up with he points out here that there is no pollution, that with nature there is no pollution. Let me see if I can find it here. It just says, well, in fact, I could probably find it on page 276. But I think, Anne, if you have time to go back and listen to last week's recording, I think you'd find it really wonderful. So,
okay,
276.
Yeah, I think this afternoon I'll have some time. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay, I've got the reference now.
Okay, wonderful. I'm taking notes.
Because what it says in the text is that in 1779, Washington ordered General Sullivan and his 3,000 soldiers to totally destroy the villages of the Iroquois Confederacy.
Yeah.
And then the reference is to Smith, A. Smith, who wrote New Age Now Begins, it's a 1976 book by McGraw-Hill. So that's the source that he's going to. And there's a quote here that's right out of Smith's book. It says that Sullivan's campaign was the most ruthless application of a scorched earth policy in American history. It bears comparison with Sherman's march to the sea or the search and destroy missions of the American soldiers in the Vietnam War. The Iroquois Confederacy was the most advanced Indian federation in the world. It had made a territory that embraced the central quarter of New York State and into an area of flourishing farms, well-cultivated fields, and orchards and sturdy houses. Indeed, I believe it would be argued that the Iroquois had carried cooperative agriculture far beyond anything that the white settlers had achieved. In a little more than a month of all this had been wiped out, the work of several generations of loving attention to the soil. Yeah.
Beautiful. And as I quoted, to that Washington did get the nickname the Destroyer. So boy, I don't know. There's a big woke movement now in the U.S. Where they're taking down statues of Abraham Lincoln and some of the people of the North even. It just, instead of taking statues down, we would just all be served to actually look at the real history. So thank you for sharing that, Richard. I
Yeah,
think
it's quite.
I think I found this thing here. Um, let's see here. In the vast majority of humans, there is an innate inclination, a propensity, even a drive to make sense and to produce order in the consonance with universal order. The assumption by many humans that there's only entropic disorder seemingly present in the universe is brought about by looking at the phases of energy separating out from any one system, and by not looking at the same disengaging energies always joining syntropically in the production of other systems.
Yeah.
We will now consider other ramifications of the about to be realized synergetic integration of all the objectives of the great half-century critical path. All artifacts needed in a synergetic fulfillment have been accomplished. See historical table of realized scientific and technical accomplishments in Appendix 1, which we'll get to in just a couple of weeks, I think. The generalized principles calling for this inclusion in the critical path conceptioning of 50 years ago have been realized objectively in special case discoveries, inventions, and designs taking place only during the last half century. And I think we're going to get this right here. It is a fact that we can now technologically recover and sort out the valuable chemistries of all the chimney escaping, sluice way escaping wastes, which though unwanted by local manufacturers, are necessary chemical element components in the overall syntropic success of eternal regeneration of universe. Nature has no pollutions. It is
Yeah.
very valuable chemistries that function only under special conditions. So the critical path strategy is to get all the moneymaker unwanted chemistries shunted into their syntropically functioning routes. Pollution is simple energy in the form of unfamiliar matter, which is the timing of the omni-regenerative cosmic system, not completely used, but must be used later. But must use later, but must use later. Anyway, so that's kind of cool. Then he goes into a bunch of things about smog, which we covered last time. And when we start cleaning today, we are just making the transition uh, from smog, where the government, soon after the LA city government made the following proclamation: people, the smog is your fault. It's your backyard incinerators that are producing this smog. And the people said, sure enough, it's our incinerators. We're in the wrong, and cars. But I was in LA. I lived in LA until 1959, and then I moved to San Diego. I was in LA from most of the time from 46 to 59. I did spend 2 years or 1 year in Florida. But I can remember when they made the law against incineration. We used to be able to burn our weeds out in the backyard anytime we want to, and then all of a sudden we had to get a permit. So I do remember that. And so now along came World War II, and the issue was buried under more immediately pressing matters. And we're going to start from reading from there. So I'm really looking forward to this. Any other comments or questions before we launch in? Do you have any further insights there, Richard, on your?
Well, just the other one, he also talked about how the corporate world, in a sense, um, the lack of a better word, bastardize the meaning of synergy. And he said that now that every other business in the Western world seems to have adopted synergy as its middle name, a tendency which hit a new low when Mobil Oil trademarked its latest multi-additive gasoline concoction called Synergy. And it may be worthwhile to glance back at the word's venerable origins. It is a theological word which retained currency in Fuller's name solely in chemistry for the unique behaviors of compounds. Yet St. Paul had used it in his epistles, Romans 8:28, 1 Corinthians 3.9, to illustrate not a static, but a dynamic conception of human, divine, and cosmic cooperation. So that's, I've never seen this before, that the word synergy coming from something out of the Bible. It says synergoi, synergoi. So it's an ancient word, and it has its own particular meaning in terms of something that's dynamic and not static.
Cool. And even though I put the link in a couple times, there's a great, to understand synergy, there's a great YouTube video on synergy, and then there's a reaction to it, which I haven't seen. I think it's relatively new, but I'm going to put that in here too.
Oh, good.
And so, because I think entropy is an important concept, and I'm just now understanding it. And entropy is a really, it's an important part of life. Most Western people see it as like the disintegration of things, and we want to avoid entropy. And of course, we do. As Bucky points out, human interaction is anti-entropic, and we do things to sustain things. But the very process of nature is not only anti-entropic, it is synergetic and regenerative. And so somehow this all gets cycled up, and we have life as a result of entropy. You know, syntropy is a result of entropy. They work together. So that's kind of cool. So I'm going to watch that second video, and those are both in the thing right there. Wonderful. Any other comments or questions before we move ahead? And I'll tell you, it's tough as an American to have to hear an insult about George Washington. I'll tell you that, because he's, you know, I mean, he's the guy who walked away from being president and said, we don't want a king here. We want 2 terms, and that's it. And here comes Joe and Manu. So how exciting. And we haven't started yet, so why don't we ask them how they're feeling and what's going on? Hey, Manu, you're just beginning. We've just given our little introduction. We've had some very controversial conversations about George Washington being the destroyer, and about the Iroquois Federation and the Constitution of America, and no credit is given to these people who had a written language and had a document organized that was used as a model for the U.S. Constitution. And besides the eagle, which was the Native American bird, and the representing the Great Spirit, it was their emblem of the great mystery. The eagle was, and of course the colonists had, the eagle had 13. The eagle has 13 arrows in its feet, representing 13 colonies. So even though we got a lot of stuff out of Native Americans, we never gave them credit. And while there's a lot of conversations going on in the U.S. about slavery issues and restitution issues and all sorts of issues, there's very little being said about Native Americans and reconstituting them. I think there's more about that happening in Canada than there is in the U.S. So anyway, so welcome, folks. I feel like I talked to us. Manu, glad you made it. How are you feeling? And what do you expect from today?
Thank you. I feel rested. I feel grateful that I could make it to the call, though late. I'm happy that Anne is here. Should be quite midday in Malaysia now. And Richard,
Yeah.
you guys, it's very late, right, Steve and Richard? So
It's 8:30, so it's not that late.
okay.
It's tougher for Joe.
Right.
Joe is 2 hours behind.
Yes. So it's 10 p.m. with Joe. Anyway, what I expect is just to listen. You know, it looks like you had a very interesting conversation. There are a lot of things going on in the world now, and it's time that the world recognizes and embraces diversity as a factor of unification rather than a factor of division.
Yeah.
So if we could study Becky maybe in that light today, that would be very, very welcome to me.
Yeah.
So that's part of my expectation apart from listening and getting a reach out of this call and giving what I can. So Joe, how do you feel? What do you expect?
I feel very good. And I feel very fortunate to be here. I will need to drop off for a few minutes once I switch over to my computer. But you know, I'm also very interested in the conversation that you were having prior, and I think that it's an important conversation to have because any kind of reconciliation requires both an admission and forgiveness. So, and that requires a certain level of understanding, and without conversation and dialogue, that understanding never happens. So, so for you know, I appreciate the dialogue that you just highlighted, Steve. As far as my expectations for today, I feel very fortunate to be here, and every time I see this group, it makes me happy. And so, but my expectation is to, continue to build on, the last part of this book, and understanding. I still come back to a few weeks ago when we were covering Bucky's comprehensive list of essentially. I don't want to cheapen it and call it project management, but it was an element of that. As to what to include in a system, and as far as tasks are concerned, and what not to include. We had a healthy discussion around that, and I think that kind of building off of that framework, continuing to build off that framework is going to be critical for the rest of the book, and so because I think frameworks for me personally are helping me to see things a little bit more clearly. And so I appreciated everybody's help with that a few weeks ago. And I also am looking forward to just building off that for the rest of the book, not just tonight. So that's my check. Anybody else? Steve,
Yeah.
did you go?
Yeah, we've all completed. And so now we're ready to begin reading if everybody's ready. Any other comments or questions before we proceed? Okay, let's see here. I just pushed the wrong button. I had pushed the right button. All right, here we go. And we're supposed to start right here. So here we go. And I love it when we rotate reading. And so who wants to read first? Read 3 or 4 paragraphs and we'll switch around. Anybody want to read first?
Okay, I can read. Okay.
Manu, you can go ahead.
Okay.
I'll do it after you. Okay.
Okay. When World War II was over, great numbers of additional citizens moved into California. Suddenly, the smoke problem was back, and the whole act of pre-World War II was repeated. The people complained to the municipal government, and the omni-change government personnel had entirely forgotten about what had happened 20 years earlier. They went after the big corporation, which threatened to leave town, and the city once again pleaded, "Don't leave town. We need you here." Once more, the city blamed the people. It's the fumes from the automobiles that are producing the smoke. We have taken examples with scientific instruments of the below the smoke air, which samples, when analyzed, prove the obnoxious fumes to be those of your automobiles. With the greatest election fund support coming from the oil men, and with the most powerful regulation lobbying being carried on also by the oil men, the politicians of America took up the cry. It's the automobiles. The people say, why? Sure enough, we'll have to do something about it. We pass laws to limit the level of fumes coming out of each car and require the manufacturer to produce and install special smoke control equipment in each car. The automobile company love that. It means more accessories to be manufactured and sold, and an obvious way to rationalize increasing the price of their cars.
Let me just say that there's that what's that thing called? Catalytic converter. That's one of the most expensive parts on a car, on the exhaust system, crazy. It's like, okay, we have pollution, let's monetize it somehow, Okay, there we go. Want to continue for another paragraph or two?
Yes, Christmas and New Year's days are celebrated everywhere in America, but Los Angeles, being a relatively new and gigantic social body, is able to alter its celebration customs. The LA refineries and heavy industries have learned that the people of California want to take Christmas vacation. So the holidays become a 10 or more day vacation starting the weekend before Christmas and continuing through the weekend after New Year's Day. It pays all the factories, all the refineries, and all the heavy industries to shut down their plants. As the holiday proceeds, the air gets clearer and clearer until the New Year's Day, the traditional Rose Bowl day. You find throughout Los Angeles a dreamy clear view of all the surroundings, often snow-capped mountains. If you went out with a scientific device to measure the fume level from cars, your instrument will read approximately 0. The only reason that auto fumes were previously measurable was that the industrial fume-laden ceilings held the auto fumes down and locked them in at the level at which you and I are breathing. I've taken many of New Year's Day pictures from the hills of Los Angeles, showing it to be absolutely clear. Then on back to work, Industrial Monday, you see a vast molasses brown cloud rolling in front of the southwest, gradually to obscure the whole of Los Angeles.
Now, I can comment on this. He's telling exactly right. I'd never thought about the fact that during that time, people didn't go to work. Their school buses don't run, a lot of things don't happen. But also during that time, it's the rainy season in LA. So the holidays start, it rains a couple times, there's not as much driving going on, and it's clear as a bell. And it was a thing known around LA that the film companies, if they were ever shooting a film and they wanted outside scenery of LA, they would film during that period. That way they'd get the clear sky and the mountains, the Hollywood Hills. You could see the beautiful rolling hills of Los Angeles. They'd shoot all those shots during that holiday, and then they'd film during the rest of the time, and then insert those shots in the movie to get the clear skies. Anyway, that was well known in California. I can remember one time, I think it was like 1971 even. It was during that holiday season. I remember driving up on the Harbor Freeway. It was an overpass, and it was really quite high, and I could see the ocean off to the west, and I could see the mountains off to the east. It was absolutely freaking beautiful, and so I can testify to everything he's saying is true. What's that?
A question here from my understanding. Is Becky saying that attributing pollution to cars or just the wrong guys? That the pollution was more from petroleum guys, and they had lobby to kind of twist the law to punish just part of a culprit. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true. The oil lobbies
Yeah, right.
funded the research on smog with cars. Yeah, I think that's, he's representing probably pretty much the truth there.
Did you,
Okay.
and Manu, you said petroleum, right? Just now.
Yeah.
I don't know what you
Yes.
said. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Now that's the
Okay.
way I heard it as well.
Okay. Does it also mean that the petroleum industry, they install filters on their refineries or not? Did they?
There's what?
Did they install filters, smoke filters
They
to
don't.
reduce?
I
They
think
don't.
there's been some work done to catch some of the heavier particles, but there is technology to capture all of it, I think, and that's just
It,
not being done.
and there is an element. I can't speak in detail about it. There's an element of carbon capture that they do invest in, and primarily because it allows them to extract. I think.
Mm.
I'm so sorry
But
driving.
I'm
Extract.
talking
Or,
then.
what's that?
I
Oh,
was
then?
talking then.
Oh,
That
no,
is
no,
40,
I
40
have no
years
idea.
ago. Okay.
Cool.
Because I have the impression that, you know, the politicians were enacting laws for the wrong, let's say the wrong culpable, or not for all everybody, and the smoke will continue, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like putting catalytic converters on cars resolve the smoke problem of Los Angeles, did it?
It did alleviate the problem. I mean, Los Angeles's air is notoriously good compared to Utah air, in fact. Utah air is pretty good, except that for about 6 weeks out of the year, we get what a low temperature inversion because we're in a valley. So there's a high pressure settles over the top, and the low pressure gets captured, and all the exhaust and smog comes up, and it's like a red alert, and people die here, and it's a big issue. There are two big issues in Utah environment. One is Salt Lake, and the fact that it's drying up, and as a result, it's a toxic wasteland. If the wind blows up, that there have been so many toxic pollutants put in the Salt Lake that it blows back into Salt Lake, and that's actually affecting the health of the families that are on the poor part of Salt Lake over there. And between Salt Lake and then the low temperature inversions capturing all the automobile stuff. And we have even though in Utah you can burn a wood stove if that's your means of heating your house. But if it's not your means of heating your house, there are certain weeks where you can't do it and you get fined if they fine you.
Okay. Let me continue one more paragraph or
Okay.
two before we stop. There is no question about it. It is the refineries, the steel and other mills, and the public utility fumes that produce the smoke. But no municipal government anywhere in America is going to let its industry go away. Therefore, cities are always going to find political ways of absorbing the industries while blaming the people. Air does not stay in any one place. There is a preposterously stubborn myth about this being my or someone else's airspace. This is my airspace. Air keeps moving right through the geometry of our environment to continually recircle the earth. The air belongs only to everybody on our planet.
So I just got to say, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but I worked in LA from 1968, 69 to about 71. And that's when I went up on Harbor Freeway and saw this beautiful rolling hills. I mean, it almost looked like Rome, the 7 hills of Rome, and you could see these hills all around thing. But I'll tell you, it's the case. There were a bunch of refineries in Torrance, and there was the airport in Inglewood. And those people used to argue as to where the smog was worse. And the people in Torrance would say the smog is worse in Inglewood because that's where the airport is. And the people in Inglewood would say the air in Torrance is worse, which is just south of Inglewood, because that's where the refineries are. And just like Bucky says, it's the air. It goes up into the air and it swirls around and it doesn't just stay where you are. So he's capturing it perfectly. Any other comments? The air belongs to only to everybody on the planet. Who care to read? Anne, you were kind of going to go next.
Let me finish that short and then answer.
Well, that's the beginning of the new paragraph, and this whole thing here is one paragraph. If you-
Okay. So one can go.
Okay, sure. We're going to have to gradually recognize that whatever our central government be, whether it's our United States government or a world government, it is going to have to put in equipment to precipitate fumes no matter what it costs. Companies must install the precipitators or be put out of business. No one will be allowed to put fumes into the sky or noxious chemistries into our waters ever again. We do have the well-proven physical equipment to deal with this problem today. At the end of the year, when we figure a company's taxes, we will rebate the company taxes by whatever the cost of the fume or chemical precipitating equipment and the cost of its operation may be. All companies will be able to compete on a fair basis despite the initial and operative cost of the equipment. But the valuable recovered chemistries must be turned over to the government by the companies. Society must become aware of the high value of these recovered chemistries. For example, the amount of sulfur coming out of all the chimneys around the world annually exactly equals amount of sulfur mined from the ground and purchased annually by the industry to keep its wheels turning. The computers will quickly show that the value of the recovered chemistries turned over to the government will more than pay back the cost of their rebates to the industrial companies. The computers will also show that the reduction in costs of respiratory ailments and other, I can't see the word because I can't move the picture away. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and other deleterious smog effects brought about by elimination of the smog constitutes an out-and-out profit to society. I go on first, or
That's profound.
pause here?
He's brought this
Yes.
up before, that the amount of sulfur produced in waste is equal to the amount of sulfur that's mined, but the mining companies want their profits, and so everybody ignores the sulfur. And nobody's looking about being regenerative or sustainable. That's an amazing point to me. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, actually, because we have our environmental school, right? So this is something that I've brought up with my team, because because we're looking at redefining pollution, right? So I think the next one is to look at sulfur and with my science people to see what that even looks like, for us to deal with the science classes, Yep.
Cool.
And also the environmental component of it. That's very powerful, actually.
Cool.
Just a question. What does the elimination of the smog constitute an out-and-out profit to society? I'm a little bit confused.
I don't know that that's ever been calculated, has it?
But what does it mean by an out-and-out?
Out and out means obvious.
Okay.
Out and out does not mean obvious, Richard. It's a colloquial term. Out and out, it's out and out violence. It means it's obvious violence. There's no other way to describe it. Out and out means obvious, and
I think it means
Okay.
outright.
yeah, outright might be another one.
So he's saying that the whole operation of producing smoke, installing equipment
Yeah,
to capture particle and all these things,
yeah,
taxing company
yeah,
overall is a net profit to society.
right. And the thing that blows my mind is it's obvious that you don't have the right to drive your truck up and dump your trash in my backyard. That's obvious. But it's not so obvious that you can't drive your truck up and just dump all your exhaust in front of my house. Somehow we have an aversion to trash, but we don't have an aversion to exhaust. Somehow you can pollute my air. You can't pollute my yard, but you can pollute my air, and that's okay. I don't understand it. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, when there is no general and immediate law something that can allow the effect to be calculated yearly. In most places where there's no such laws and technology to do, the mining company or whatever company, the refinery, will operated, and 20 years later, the effect will only be on citizens suffering from respiratory diseases, some other diseases, and then there will be inference to the effect of the activities that were carried 20 years earlier. And the problem is that when you go and try to go after those companies, there have been merger acquisitions, and there was no law and obligation that obligated the company that purchased the core operation. That have been diluted to also carry liabilities. And the poor citizens are all usually left generations after, and in the best of cases with meager compensations that does not compensate for anything, any substantial part of harm that their family of generation went through.
Cool. Any other comments, questions?
I think it's more is the one that's really powerful is the fact that he wrote this like
Yeah,
1980 something.
86, yeah. 86.
Yeah, it's that because back then, yes, we started having more environmental issues. But it holds true till today, and the answers were already there back then, and we're just not looking at it seriously. There's money there. He's giving the solution where there's money there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So you want to read from there?
Okay. The recirculation of metals and other chemistries is now being handled only by what we call mongers. Before World War I, society wrongly assumed that metals and chemicals traveled only a one-way street to the rusting dump heaps. A company that produced iron assumed it to be consumed like food or rusted away until it had entirely disappeared. All physical substances were assumed to be entropic, that is, to waste away, never to return. It was not until the enormous amounts of metals produced in World War I began to come back again into the market in the 1930s that those concerned with such matters began to reorganize the economic advantages existing in obsolete form metals returning as scrap, which metals were more highly refined and concentrated than were the newly minted ores. Scrap became extremely important. The scrapmongers are in business to make money. They sell their scrap metals only when they feel sure they are getting the highest possible prices. To increase prices, the profit-motivated mongers held onto their scrap. As a consequence, their yards get bigger and bigger, as well as more and more unsightly. This constitutes a blockage in the world's metal recirculatory system. This means that world government is going to have to take over altogether all the functions of recirculation. Talking about scraps, which is more accurately to be called recirculation, is analogous to talking about the bloodstream or other circulatory systems of humans and other organisms. We are an integral stage in an omni-regenerative cosmic system. The universe is 100% regenerative. I love that. Terrestrial ecology has been, but it's no longer 100% regenerative. Recirculation is regenerative. Blockages in that recirculation occur when money-making people seeking special economic advantage for themselves hold back the flow of regenerative essentials to increase their prices. I'm going to say something here because having gone through these past few years, with the meeting group here, I realized that, you know, as we were talking about the economic side of things, that our economists, many of them are making decisions without knowing scientific facts. So I was going to text this morning to my principal in one of my schools, because she was holding the position of the head of the business programs for many years, and that we have to sit down to take our teachers doing econs and accounting through this and help them understand the science behind whatever they're saying does not match, right? They do not match at all. So I'm just sharing something that might take away after reading this. Something I wanted to do this morning, and just fits very nicely. So this whole chapter, I could really make it a must read for them.
Cool.
Okay. So
But this
this
presupposes the existence of, how does he call it, a general government or world government? Because if I take the example, our example here, you know, you see copper, for example, copper wires. Criminals come and vandalize the, you know, copper wires from railways, and it disuses immediately the trains. So, if you say that the scrap mongering is part of recirculation, and there shouldn't be any restriction, and there are syndicates that take over, and they scrap all over, you know, including well-deserving and serving equipment and infrastructure that we have here, because it's a big problem. So how is that addressed?
Oh yeah, just a note here. Yesterday, I was with my team, and we were just discussing, because one of them used to work in one of the largest low-cost carriers in the region here, and because he was dealing with ground handling and he was dealing with the founder and everything, and he told us that every year there are airplanes being abandoned, you know, at the airports, because they either cannot continue to make payments, etc. So at the end of like the year or so, they would auction these aircrafts off. And one of the things at a very cheap price, right? And he was telling us that quite a number of companies have actually bought the planes and use them as restaurants and so on, which I'm aware that it's been done in many countries. And I saw a program where they turned part of the aircraft into and it was integrated with the building of their house, so it became an accommodation. It's amazing, you know. So so that was one thing that came up, and another one was sharing with me. So these scraps that can literally be, I mean, imagine they can become accommodations, right? And then another one talked about the wife, because he had to help her. There's a technique for art where they make use of all the X-rays, you know, the X-rays, the plastic thing, and they actually remove gold from there. It's expensive, you know, at the moment, because you're doing it at home and, you know, with some equipment that you have to buy, but you can extract gold, which they have done. And the people who have turned that into art, I can't recall the name of it now, but it was just yesterday we were talking about it over lunch, you know. So that's right there is the recirculatory integrity, and I mean, it's the recirculation that we can do, you know. So
That's a good point, and it's quite notorious, in fact, that computer computer parts, scrap computer parts, old computer parts are being dumped in some countries, and there are whole communities of people who go out in those and pull those computer things apart and take out the parts and make money and survive off of it. The problem is they're health hazards. They're filled with toxic chemicals, and the kids who are doing that and the people who are doing that are hurting themselves because they're not being done properly.
Mm.
Also, I wanted to point out that he's using scrap and scrap mongers. If you were to use the word scrapyard with me, I would probably figure out what you're talking about. I'd say, well, what do you mean scrapyard? But if you use the term junkyard, I know exactly what you're talking about, which I think is to Bucky's point, is that he, instead of calling it scrap, it needs to be called recirculation. I
Mm.
mean, why don't I call a junkyard a recirculation yard? And it never dawned on me, these junkyards just get bigger and bigger and they start stacking the cars on top of each other. Back when I was a kid, they were like one level high. Now I go into a junkyard and stack 2 and 3 levels high. And I'm going, wow, I just thought it was a junkyard. But it didn't dawn on me until now that the price of those metals and the price of those parts continue to go up. So as long as the junkyard or the recirculation yard managers or family that's running it makes enough money to buy their food and buy a nice house on the hill and do whatever, the rest of it's just sitting there like money in a bank. It just keeps going up in value. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah.
Never thought of that.
Bucky is part of saying that hoarding of any kind
Yeah.
must
He's
be
about to say,
banished from human affairs.
yeah, it's coming in the next paragraph.
Yeah. But yes, that answered my question too. If there's cable theft on a railway line, and that basically sabotages the traffic on that day, it is a problem. That was the question I had before.
Ah,
So there should be in this some kind of laws, enforcement of laws that prevent those kind of things from happening. And hoarding is part of a thing, because the guy who comes and vandalize, say, and commit cable theft, copper cable theft on a railway line, takes it somewhere to somebody who's going to take it and store it.
yeah. Yeah.
And wait until the price is okay,
Yeah.
before you can export it.
And
The
as
problem is that these guys, they have licenses to export the metal.
Yeah.
And that is a tacit recognition that if you give license to somebody, it doesn't mean that the person has to just export any mean. He has to accumulate a certain quantity before he can load, a cargo on a ship.
Yeah.
To get around in a way that is effective. So I don't know how all of this meshing is going to be taken care of.
Sure.
Or taken care of.
And I'm kind of reluctant. I don't think we need laws. So I mean, that's the standard approach. Let's pass some laws. I think what we need is responsible citizenry. I mean, I flush my toilet as little often as I can. I mean, I may flush it twice a day. I have I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, but we have a thing say, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. So I've been known not to flush my toilet, but only once a day. And yet I think most people flush their toilets 5 and 10 times a day. We don't, it's not about the law. It's about personal accountability, I believe. And until each of us get accountable, there's all laws do is create black markets. I mean, not all, but sarcastically, I could say that, and it'd be arguable. Any other comments, questions? You want to continue to read, or who's next to read?
Yeah, can pass it on.
Okay. Richard, you want to go for it?
Starting there?
I think starting there, yeah.
Okay. Governments are going to have to take over the functioning of eliminating any and all stoppages in the recirculatory integrity of our planet. all corporations are going to have to turn over to the government all the chemicals they recover by fume, precipitation, or filtered sluiceway condensations. Hoarding of any kind must be banished from human affairs. Today in the copper industry, the quantity of recirculating scrap copper is so great that it dwarfs the newly mined copper production, which provokes the world copper mining owning cartel into maintaining a powerful Washington lobby that seeks to increase government stockpiling of copper. All special interest lobbies are entropic. Class 1 evolution is progressively eliminating all blockages to recirculation. Regenerative recirculation of metals has the unique function of realizing the 22.5-year recirculation cycle. It is these cyclically produced technological gains that make it possible to take care of ever more humans at ever higher standards of living with ever less pounds and volume of matter and ever less ergs of energy and seconds of time per each technical function performance. I was able to arrive at that figure of 22.5 year metals recirculating cycle in 1936. I was working for the Phelps Dodge Company, who had asked me to give them some prognostications about the use of copper in the future of the world industry. Copper is the most plentiful of the most efficient electric power production and conduction metals. World War I was a power production war, and copper is the most plentiful of the non-sparking metals and is therefore logically employed in connection with gunpowder handling equipment such as shells inserted into the gun breeches. Because of these facts, the demand for copper in 1917 was epocally great. Now, long after World War I, and its huge demand for copper core to pure metal reduction by the vastly less expensive flotation processes and the also much less expensive electrolytic refining brought the cost of mining and refining copper so low that the cash value of the average amounts of recoverable gold and silver co-occurring with the copper, which gold and silver are automatically purchased by the U.S. government mint, exactly paid for all the mining and refining of the copper itself. The whole price paid for copper was profit. The mine owners then decided to mine only when the prices bid for copper were at a peak. The prices bid always peaked in wartime. With World War I the World War copper cartel wanted and worked for the start of World War II. In the 1930s, the big copper companies were badly bothered by the influx of copper scrap into the marketplace. Up to that time, when I came to study the copper situation, the rates of evolutionary change were to slow down the mine owners, were so slow that the mine owners had no idea that the copper they sold would ever come back on the market to disturb their price. In 1936, the copper price controls were completely challenged by the scrap influx. Phelps Dodge asked me to do some research on the problem, so I reviewed all the known published data of the metals world. In the metals world, very accurate records are kept about how metals have been and are now being used. Very profitable publications are maintained by the affluent metals businesses. Very accurate inventories exist detailing, for instance, how much of any given metal is built into an automobile. In 1936, there was only about 30 pounds of copper in each American automobile. Copper is expensive, and the auto manufacturers tried to keep the use of expensive metals to a minimum. However, considerable copper is used in a gas station. For instance, in all the gas tank filling nozzle equipment, because it's non-sparking, you couldn't possibly use a sparking metal such as steel around gasoline. I guess not. I was able to arrive at the previously undiscovered 22.5-year recycling figure by very carefully integrating the total inventory of the in-use tonnage of metals in all the main categories of their use. For instance, the inventoried copper in all extant buildings in old roofing, gutterings and flashings, brass pipes, and so forth. The total inventory of copper in old buildings, both business and residential, is an inventory that becomes obsolete and is scrapped and recirculated on an overall average of once every 50 years. Within the building category, copper comes out faster from the big city buildings than from single-family country residences. What makes obsolete any of the major categories of metals in use is the rate at which the new technologies occur that make obsolete the older technologies. In the electronics industry, there exists only a 2-year lag between the discovery of or invention of new functions and improved techniques and their acceptance and employment by the electronics industry. This short time lag is occasioned by the fact that the physical phenomena involved operate at sub-visible to human sight levels. This means that the behaviors are considered only on a basis of figures. If this one works better than the others to a sufficient numerically expressible degree without lowering contiguous behavioral efficiencies, it can be reliably calculated that the adoption of the newer facility will produce universal advantage. No human opinions on the merits or demerits of the discoveries and their inventive technical realizations are involved.
Any comments or questions? Okay.
Well, that gets to one of the points really quickly that I've been wanting to cover with the Wednesday group when we talked about the idea of lag and adoption, technology adoption, because this is one of the key areas I think that I would like to think about in terms of AI. How quickly will this actually be adopted? We know it's here. We know to some degree at least these large language models are here, and who knows what else is actually out there. But to what extent will these technologies actually make it into production, and how quickly? They will at some point, but understanding that to me is, I think, critical. Because you're talking about how quickly these things will be adopted. And it also has a huge impact on the workforce and skills and training and people's lives. And I mean, in the sense that how many times they're going to have to reiterate and recreate themselves, or even if they are going to have, to a certain degree, jobs at all. Anyway, but this is going back, looking at this, the way he's talking about the way technology is evolves and is integrated and how quickly it's adopted. He's talking about lag. Anyway, I think that this is an important topic and something that need to think more deeply about.
Cool.
Geometrically, I will notice how lag here is a dual of cycle.
How what is a dual of cycle?
Lag.
Oh,
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Okay. It says, for example, when you talk about electronics, you say the cycle is 2 years, recirculation cycle is 2 years. Because the physical phenomenon happening is actually subvisible to human, how would I call it, senses?
yeah, perception, yeah, awareness.
Perception. Yes.
Yeah, he
So,
talked about copper being a 22-year cycle.
yes, copper because a 22-year cycle, because of our houses,
Yeah,
you can, like it's slower for
yeah,
you to see, to be able to perceive the recirculated metal, the scrap metal. But when it comes to electronics, the invention, you have an invention, it's just 2 years for it to apply and manifest. I thought it was an interesting point, but
A very interesting point, because then imagine what he would say about software.
yeah. Yeah, he wrote this in 85. I mean, the world's a completely different place.
Yeah, no, so I mean, this is
79 that he wrote this,
Yeah,
because it passed on in 1983.
yeah. Okay. Joe, do you want to read? Or are you kind of,
sure. No, I can read.
all right, we're starting at the top of the page.
In the aeronautical arts, airframe, power plant, instrumentation, airport facilities, and ground-controlled flight pattern technologies, there is a 5-year gestation period between invention and industry's adoption for use. The discoveries and technical inventions in the aeronautical arts are both visible and invisible. When invisible, the decisions to adopt are made scientifically through instrumentally derived numbers. Where visible, the decisions are made on past experience and opinionated comparisons. Interesting. Where there is room for opinion and personal prejudice, the decisions to reject or to adopt take longer. The more science and the less opinion is involved, the quicker the new technology is adopted. It is the rate at which new inventions are adopted that spells the rate of obsolescence of the technologies they are to replace. By taking the invention gestation rates in the different industries, which we've discussed elsewhere in this book, 2 years in electronic between invention and use, 5 years in aviation between invention and use, 10 years in automobile manufacturing, 15 in railroad, 25 years in big buildings, and 50 years in single family dwellings. Wow. We integrate the amount of copper in each use category and their respective number of years of use, and thus find the average rate at which copper and all the metals come back as scrap to be every 22.5 years.
Okay, let's pause right there for a second, because now in single family home construction, very little copper is being used. There's the thing called PEC, which is kind of like a PVC. It's a plastic, and it's more like hoses. And it used to be important in construction of housing that if you ever ran plumbing, there was a certain amount of plumbing that was lead, a certain amount of plumbing that was iron, and then a certain amount that was copper. And when you built in a plumbing section, you ran those vertically up on the same wall. So basically, bathrooms and kitchens were all adjoining. But with the new use of PEC, it's so cheap to run that hose to the other side of the house. It doesn't matter. Now my son's an architect, and he designs homes as part of what he does. And you can put a sink, a kitchen anywhere you want to put it, because PEC is so cheap that you run the PEC. So that's interesting to me.
It isn't. I mean, they used to actually rip that out, the copper out of houses back in 2008 at one point, right?
Right.
Because really, when they had the foreclosure, people would go in, and that would be because the house wasn't worth a lot. But really quickly, what do people think about where there is room for opinion and personal prejudice? The decisions to reject or to adopt take longer. The more science and the less opinion is involved, the quicker the new technology is adopted. In a way, I see what he's saying, but let's try and think about it in terms of today. I mean, would he then outsource decisions to the machines? I mean, in a way, that's kind of if you're
yeah,
taking opinion out of it, you're
yeah,
taking
he's trying to run everything by computers.
if you're taking judgment out of it, and I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I look at computers as augmentation of human intelligence, not human intelligence in and of itself.
Exactly. And of course, this is the time he was kind of arguing from a place of cybernetics, when the computers started coming out. By this time, computers were getting more and more efficient. And Buckminster Fuller seems to, his point of view is that computers are going to be so smart and the answers are going to be so obvious that people are going to start listening to computers. And of course, he misses a point here because he says when invisible, the decisions to adopt are made scientifically through instrumentally derived numbers. I think that's kind of idealistic because invisible to whom? And I would say invisible to people. And I think one of the elements here is capture. In other words, if these corporations have captured a certain paradigm on a particular topic, and they make sure that they play down the hidden, ways that can maximize their profits by hiding costs or by creating byproducts, spitting off byproducts. And I think there's a degree of corporate capture in here that he doesn't bring up. And it makes his answer not quite so true to the world.
I I agree with you, and I think the second part of it is where visible the decisions are made on past experience and opinionated comparisons. But he's talking about bias, right?
He's talking about bias, but I think he misses corporate capture.
But
Besides bias, because like I just said, I don't call scrapyards. My grandpa used to say scrapyards, but I've always said junkyards. If you told me scrapyards, I'd know what you're talking about. But I'm convinced that's junk. I'm convinced those things create no value. They're just junk, right?
and I agree with that. But this is kind of where it's kind of critical is he saying data is not biased?
Yeah, I think he's making the assumption that computer analysis would not be biased. And he did not know about corporate capture.
So, and that to me is has a lot of flaws. That's all. And I'm not saying that. I don't know, and I don't want to be someone who they have a hammer and everything looks like a nail. But I've been talking a lot about AI lately, and for the today, and specifically as it relates to judgment. And this idea that computers are not necessarily biased, I think is a complete misnomer. And I also think that there's Bucky of all people who applies higher level principles and universal principles to decision making. This doesn't seem to be congruent with what applying to something, applying something unseen and abstract and higher level principles to decision making.
And Joe, you're referring, I think, specifically to Google's big faux pas over the last couple of weeks when their AI produced a black George Washington.
Yeah.
And that that bias is so built into AI, at least at the Google faux pas kind of proves it. The woke bias is so built in. There were no guardrails up to protect AI from reality, to enforce reality in AI. So they're producing Asian black people and they're producing black white people in these generative things. Because as I recall the argument, the AI was producing a bunch of white people, and they said, well, look, you've got at least 24% of this particular professional population is black or Asian or whatever. So let's push it that way. And all of a sudden out comes an Asian black guy and a black George Washington.
And one of the, I think the more important things is that that our ability to reason, supposedly, you know, our ability to higher level reasoning is not strictly based on the information that we scrape from the internet. And so I think that that's kind of key here. Anyway, I think that this is interesting. I think that the you know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years automobiles. I mean, if you think about the iterations of automobiles now, how many changes are actually made with even a year, with even in the year, within weeks in certain cases. And when you're talking about 25 years for big buildings, that's down 50 years for single family. This is all, you know, very, very, but it's important the way he's broken this out, at least, to think about how quickly the iterations are, the cycles, as Manu was talking about just a little bit ago.
And your point about cars, Joe, is really important. Back in 1985, there was a brand new model of a car. They were obvious. In the 60s, they were very obvious. Every year had a new car. And by the 80s, it became to be less obvious. And now I had a 2005 Prius and I bought a 2013 Prius. And you would have to be an expert in Priuses if those three cars were parked side by side, a 2005 Prius, 2013 Prius, and a 2023 Prius. You would have to be an expert in Priuses to tell what year they were, and you'd have to tell by the shape, by the number of bulbs in the taillights, because the body features are so similar. So you're absolutely right. And they don't, you know, back in when I was a kid, they would produce the 1969 model would come out in 1968, in November of 68. You know, they would do that. But now it's like they just make a change in the middle of the thing. And now you have to know your VIN number to know what kind of parts you have in your car.
Well, one last comment. I'm sorry, did I walk on your lines?
What?
Did I walk on your lines?
No, not at all.
No, one last comment is even the idea of what a car is.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that it you know, you know, we've spoken about here in the past, you know, Tesla has it down to two parts in certain cases.
Yeah.
The body, and then the idea of what a change actually is, it's an update.
Yeah.
And it's no longer the fundamental structure of it has changed. So, but nonetheless, the categories that, for lack of a better term, still hold true. I mean, in
But
other
let's
words,
apply that, Joe, to Tesla and just
that's
see
what I'm
if
saying.
this whole. The first Tesla that came in,
Yeah,
it was about electricity in the car. It was about the battery, huh? And
that's right.
electricity. That was what it was. The new Tesla is more about the mega factory
Right.
and putting together in two parts.
The gigacast. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
I say gigafactory, I say mega factory, gigafactory. So is that 10 years between the two?
Is that what?
10 years.
Is that 10 years between the first of Elon Musk electric cars and this the new, I don't know exactly the model, how they call them, the new car that is just in two parts assembled?
Yeah,
I think that it's
Because
the
that is a radical change. It's an invention. It's a radical change in the manufacturing of a car.
it is. It's fundamentally will change the car industry for a very long time.
And in my opinion, when was it? The first.
Gee, you know,
No, this gigafactory, when was it?
oh,
Was
that
it
was
3
2
years ago,
years ago.
4 years ago, 5 years ago? When was it?
That was only a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, that was maybe 4 years ago. And there's a company in Italy that builds these gigacast machines. But yeah,
And can we say the electric car is 2010, 28, 20?
I was thinking around 2012, but yeah, you're probably right.
So maybe 10 years. I was just trying to gauge that, to try to assess that what Bucky is saying here is that automobile is 10 years.
Eh, But what he's saying 10 years in between fossil
Invention and
fuel.
use. Okay, I
Okay.
guess that the gigafactory concept was invented way before. It wasn't like,
It
Elon
was.
Musk decided to use it. I said the gigafactory concept was
Yeah,
invented way before.
it was. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Here's the
probably from NASA or whatever, operations, in that they had everything on site and integrated for example, for the shuttle or whatever. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But I'm just trying to say the invention took place and the use was, I mean, the cars that are produced, I don't know which model they call it, it's just a few years ago. That
wow.
actually turned Elon Musk's operation into profit. Tesla wasn't making profit
No.
for a long time. Now it's making profit.
Yeah. Here's the interesting points that Joe brings up. Tesla has been working on larger casting parts for its vehicles to make the manufacturing easier. For example, the Model Y's rear unit assembly is made of 2 large parts, while the Model 3 is made of 70 different metal parts. Tesla is also working on a new casting machine to produce a large part of the Model Y frame in one piece. Tesla has also been using 3D printers to make test molds out of industrial sand. This allows Tesla to tweak prototypes as many times as needed, and the cost of design validation is about 3% of doing the same thing with a metal prototype.
Mm.
That's freaking amazing.
No, it most certainly is, and I think, but it's an interesting point, Manu. You're right. If you think about it in 10 years, it has been 10 years, in that sense. But um, the uh, the um, important part, and we talked about this, is that we've talked about complexity here in the past, is that Tesla's figured out a way to simplify and work within a complex system as opposed to just add parts on and make things more complicated. And I think that that's a very important point. That's a distinction in the sense that a lot of car makers will put something on to add onto the structure and just to solve a problem or to add a feature. And what he's looking at is keeping the addition, being able to maintain the all feature offerings while simplifying the structure itself. And that's real ephemeralization. That's actually doing more with less. That's not in the sense that some may say, oh, doing more with less is getting 55 miles to the gallon instead of 35 a gallon. No, that's not doing more with less necessarily. It is in that particular instance, maybe. But if the car is not necessarily as a whole not more efficient, it's more efficient fuel economy wise, but it doesn't necessarily make it more efficient or more simple. The car could have more parts. It could have more sensors. It could have all these other things. And what Elon Musk is able to do is both simplify and and simplify both the structure, the physical structure and the features as well. without compromising the features, I should say.
But if you take this Tesla, and then you want to make an analogy with Ford, that is
Right.
bringing that benefit to the masses. You see that Tesla is still just a Mercedes, relatively. And Beat or Byte, I don't know how you call it, the
Oh, yeah.
Chinese,
you're right. Yeah.
the Chinese is actually affecting that, in that it is bringing the benefit of electric cars to people at affordable prices. A Tesla is still largely not affordable in today's condition
Right.
But
to the average
his goal was to
American,
make a car for
not
20
to
grand.
talk about the average citizen of the world. I mean, the average American, which is the richest country in the world.
Yeah.
You're right, but and that's an important point. And when I say the total structure, at least the price has been coming down for Teslas, and they have, I'd imagine goals to come down even more. The whole idea of doing more with less, and coming back to using the other paradigm where or companies were adding features on and adding parts, the price of the car went up. So the idea of doing more with less is in this particular instance, like this is a real example, I think, of doing more. Tesla's a real example of doing more with less versus where we might assume that other vehicle makers were doing more with less in a particular instance within the car, not necessarily as the car as a whole. So anyway, that's an important distinction, I think, to make.
Well,
But
and
to
I
me,
agree.
to me, that's exactly the Achilles heel of Bucky. It is technology permitting. It has not kind of it has not, it's not, that, how would I call it, adoption. There have been so many barriers of type 2 to the spread of the use generally. You see, when Ford did popularize cars, so the rate of replacement of horse cars with cars was very fast, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And before Ford, there were automobile that had steam engines or other things. But Ford's automobile was adopted across America by a large chunk of the population. We're not seeing that today, and that has been, in my opinion, Bucky's, what we say as Bucky was right, but optimistic
Right.
when it came to the rate of adoption.
I think it was pretty realistic in terms of his I mean, he predicted these different cycles and said in single family home it's going to take 50 years. Earlier in the book, we read about how frustrated he was because I designed this Dymaxion house and found out that he couldn't get it financed and it would take another 50 years. And I pointed out in that discussion that it was Warren Buffett who was all excited about Berkshire funding, who was the major mobile home funder in America, and Warren Buffett thought, well, that's the future. We're going to do all mobile and prefabricated and manufactured housing. Stick building is going away, and so the old time financing is going away. Warren Buffett bought Berkshire Funding, which is now his main company, part of his main company, Berkshire, whatever it's called. He has it hyphenated with something, and he was wrong because the institutions in the West were so rigid that he had to shift because mobile home and modular construction is still avant-garde. I mean, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. This is one area that, and it's something I think that we ought to heed right now, is how the political process
Yeah.
and existing rent seekers or institutions. Actually, that's one of the topics. That existing institutions that are now in power, and Bucky goes through this earlier in the book, even through the maturation process of the car industry overall with the Dodge brothers and everything, and big finance getting involved, and essentially what happened to those automakers, and where he, and this is what's important to consider, is how institutions, existing institutions, and politics get in the way of delivering services to the people.
Absolutely right. And it's because of corporate capture. I think to me, it's that simple.
Yeah. I agree with you.
And I want to,
I think it's it's corporate capture in conjunction with politics.
agree.
They're using
Political capture.
yeah. So
Yeah,
okay.
I agree with you. And
Okay.
coming back to your ephemerization, doing more with less, when I remember I showed a video here 4 months ago about how with rockets they were building, Tesla was building rockets that had engines that required 100 parts. And that you had to build a cylinder that got encased by another cylinder, that got encased by another cylinder. And now they have 3D printers that print that part in one printing. They print the inside of it and then print outside of it as they go. And it's just one manufacturing step. So it's not 100 parts assembled into one, it's one 3D printed part. That's ephemerization. Okay. I've lost track of who's reading what.
I'm reading.
It's you, Steve?
Yeah,
It could be me. If Joe wants to read here, that's fine.
yeah, I'll read it. It's 284 critical path. The
I put up
unprecedented.
here by taking, right?
No, no, that
Okay,
was
you read that already? Okay.
Yep. 284 critical path. The unprecedentedly great World War I copper production occurred primarily in America. In one year, in 1917, humanity took more copper out of the ground, refined it, and put it to work than had been cumulatively produced in all the world throughout all previously recorded histories years. And that's very similar to what data is today. Actually, we're producing more data than ever before. This produced in 1917 a vertical cliff of the all history charts of world copper production, aiding 1.5 years to 1917 would bring the date of reappearance of the rest of that 1917 world record production scrap to July 1939. So I told Phelps Dodge in 1936 that 3 years later, in July 1939, they were going to be overwhelmed by scrap. Meanwhile, I became the science and technology consultant on the editorial staff of Fortune magazine in 1938. In July 1939, the head of research for Phelps Dodge called me up on the telephone and said, Bucky, your 22.5 year scrap return prediction is absolutely right. Go down into the New York docks and observe. I did so. Alongside all the great cargo ships were cargo barges filled with scrap metals, piled enormously high. Copper is plentiful enough to be trustworthy used, but scarce enough to be used only in the most efficient manner. Copper is a sensitive metal, the so-called bellwether of the metals. Whatever copper does indicates exactly what the other metals are going to do in the price and production markets. For instance, steel scrap was also coming back at exactly the same rate as copper. 22.5 years after production from the newly mined ore, hoping to protect their anticipated very high prices when World War II came along. And all unbeknownst to the general public, all the USA metals owners in 1939 were selling all their scrap metal to Germany and Japan to fire back at America 2 years later in World War II did come along. It was not a moral thing for the scrape mongers to do. The public in general had not the slightest idea what was going on. The American business public didn't catch on to the idea of metal scrap recirculation until long after World War II was over. The American and world public at large have not as yet caught on to the significance of recirculating scrap metals, making almost obsolete further mining of metallic ores in general. The authors of the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth had never heard of scrap metals recirculation.
Okay, we're approaching the 0 hour. So this is a good place to start. He's looks like he's going to be doing something a little bit different. So we're going to start here next week on 9/3/10. And I have trouble with my computer. 9/10. Okay, that should have been
What page is there? What page is that?
That's hang on, I'm having trouble with my, there we go. Okay, that is, we left off on page 285. And so I now point out is on page 284. Okay, so that wraps us up for tonight. It's time for some takeaways. Joe, how are you feeling and what are you taking away today?
I'm feeling really good. I appreciate everybody, seeing everybody and spending Saturday night with you guys, or Sunday morning. And for me, I'm very much interested in diving into this idea of lag. So for me to kind of look back and start to get a little bit of a refresher as to how this idea of lag has evolved over the years and adoptions have worked, it's a lot of fun. And I think that looking at, kind of even the categories that Bucky, forgive me, that Bucky had set up, yep, had is helpful even to look at where industries are today and to see how they have evolved. Even thinking about in terms of buildings, retrofitting buildings, how that functions, housing, how housing has evolved. We talked a little bit about that, and how copper is not even necessarily used in housing now. It's not seen as efficient. And so this is the it's giving context to a lot of the industries that where we are today and where we've been. So thinking of lag within the cycles, we've talked about that a little bit, and we talked about that in the past with Kelly. And the last thing is to refocus on this idea that even Bucky's perspectives on technology, specifically AI, how we look at AI now, and its possibilities and limitations, and how we can look at this as augmentation of augmenting human capabilities or we could look at it as something that's going to make the decisions for us. And I think that the former is much more important than the latter. And I think we have to look at it as working as augmenting human capabilities. And the reason I say that is not that we're not biased and don't have problems, but we at least have the possibility of applying the higher level ideals, and not just looking at things algorithmically. And I think data is biased. Anyway, that's a lot. Lastly, the link I had put in the chat previously, it's direct air capture that oil companies are really involved in. I said carbon capture, and I was incorrect with that. Anyway, so that was those are my takeaways, and so appreciate everybody. Anne, how do you feel, and what do you take away from today?
Who's that?
Anne.
Oh, right. Actually, the underlying thing this past few months has actually been nature has no pollution, you know. So, and when we stepped into this chapter, it was just perfect, you know. Then the whole idea of recirculation, I really like that, because we keep talking now about circular economy, and people don't really understand that well, definitely not in our country, but the whole idea of recirculation, I think that's something easier for people to accept, because when you part economy in there for people, you have one more dimension that has to be explained, and if people don't know economy or don't really understand it, then it becomes a bit more of like there's even a bigger lag, you know. So I like the idea, the recirculation part of it, and we drive that, and it's easier for people to get that moving than trying to understand circular economy. The whole thing about Joe, I think you said something about the less science, and then it's slower for people to make a decision, and the minute they have the science to back it up, I like that a lot. And Steve, how do you spell that? PEC?
I'll look it up right now. I think it's PEC.
PEC, okay.
I'm gonna double check and check. Plumbing.
Yeah, and thank you for the video on the carbon
It's
cap.
PEX, PEX.
Oh, PEX, right? PEX, okay.
Cross-linked polyethylene.
Okay, I'll go check it. And the video on carbon capture, because one of those things that we're working on with our students at the moment actually is carbon capture. They've been weighing plants and everything, but it's bigger than that, because it goes into carbon credits and, you know,
right.
Carbon footprint. They are all together and not just one on its own. So I really am looking forward to watching that video. And Manu, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today?
I feel good in certain way, but queasy in another way. And this kind of paradox stems from some of the things here, in that there is both in the view of unlimited resources and that of limited resources, discussion about world government, discussion about how do you regulate that in such a way that there are no stockpiles, that the circulatory type 1 economy goes on. And that leaves me with a lot of questions, because, you know, if you look, sometimes when you read Buck, you have the impression that he's advocating, and he is, you know, advocating world government. But when you also read today about, what is going on in places, people who advocate shortage, they say also world government to apply those things. It leaves me a little bit perplexed. So maybe somebody, maybe Steve or Richard will in the impression clarify that to me. Otherwise, yes, and talk about the circular economy. And maybe the economy wasn't the word, the circular nature of our planet functioning. And then we have to adjust ourselves and position ourselves to be able to live in a way that is sustainable and that is regenerative. And the recognition of the specific cycles of parts of what we use is really, in my opinion, a critical awareness in terms of directing how design should be carried. I think that is my biggest takeaway from this. And where he said it is the rate at which new inventions are adopted that spells the rate of obsolescence of a technology. They are to be replaced. No, I don't know if I took it clearly. Or where there's room for opinion and personal prejudice, the decision to reject or to adopt take longer. So those are all the tweaks that really I would like to have some clarification on. So I'll stop here babbling and bumbling. Richard, how do you feel? What do you take away?
Well, I feel good about the discussion. I guess in terms of the takeaway, my first thought was talk about lag. But here we are looking at a book that is over 40 years out. And with some few exceptions, it's still a relevant book to discuss, which is kind of amazing. And there's very few people that actually talk about the kinds of things that Fuller was talking about 40 years ago, even now. So that's one lag issue. The other lag issue in terms of science, which I guess I've spoken about before, we're now pretty close to 125 years out with new science, the quantum and other kinds of sciences, and it's nowhere near, as far as I can tell, into mainstream education or basic education, kinds of things that Anne and her group are trying to do. And it's quite amazing that she represents, to some extent, what Fuller was all about, a maverick. She's gone outside the system in order to try and advance the system, because otherwise the system is just going to hold her back. And then the one on carbon has been interesting for me in terms of carbon capture and the kind of thing that Anna's just talking about in terms of her young students going to get involved. I've been really confused because when I read all about the molecular structure of the tetrahedron, and I discover that the molecular structure, or it's the tetrahedron is the molecular structure of the carbon atom, and carbon atom is essential to life. So then I hear that we're capturing carbon as if it's the evil, and that we're going to get rid of it somehow, which to me says, why the hell are we capturing carbon, the essence of life, to throw it away somewhere? But then when you look at it, we're not capturing carbon, we're capturing carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And so we shorthand it to carbon, and it's just like the sunrise and sunset. We now use a word that is wrong. And it's got to confuse the young students to sort of saying, if carbon is the essence of life and I'm capturing carbon to get rid of it, you adults, are crazy. Trying to teach me to understand carbon in these two divergent ways. So I guess I'd like to have more clarification from whoever provides it to be more clear that it's carbon dioxide. It's that sort of poisonous kind of part that we're trying to capture and do away with, so to speak. We're not trying to get rid of carbon. Carbon is essential. If we get rid of carbon, you get rid of you and I eventually. Anyway, that's my big takeaway.
At the end, after everyone has gone, I can provide a bit of insight on that one. Yeah. Something very interesting. Yeah. Carry on. Sorry about that.
No, carry on, please.
Oh, okay. There was one of my global CEO here. He's British, so he was actually he met up with someone from Shell in our country, and there's somebody he met who's been a Shell engineer for quite a while. So one of the things he brought up was, I think this idea of carbon capture is about or carbon dioxide. He said that if you look at the map here of the world, and look at the vegetation that was 25 years ago and today, there's more vegetation today than ever there was during 25 years ago. And and the amount of carbon dioxide has actually increased. And at its peak, okay, I think it went up by about 0.11%. So carbon dioxide in the air was 0.03. Now it's gone up by about 0.1 or something like that, or 0.4. I don't know. I can't recall. I got to get the info again. And at its peak, when the world where vegetation was like lush all over the world, it was at 1.4%. So there's still a ways to go, and yet the plants and everything will thrive beautifully. So I think the idea also maybe of this carbon dioxide capture or whatever, maybe it's not to get rid of it. It's just that for the plant to use it, and but it can hold it for a long time, and it removes it just from the air. And I think that they're dealing with the whole idea of global warming, and I don't know how much we can do with that one, because the world will just go on and do its own thing, whichever way it will, Yeah. So that's something I thought would be very interesting. And let me see if I can get the link for this. I think there's a video on this. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Over to you, Steve.
Okay. I'm sitting here. I'm just, I'm sitting here with my mind boggled about this comprehensivist, this generalist. One of the big things about one of the big conversations about AI today is regulation. And I've been hearing from some of the insiders, and I put a link. Did I put the link in yet? I think I put a link in on the chat. I have a thing there about PECs, explaining about PECs. Yes, I put a link into the All In podcast number 168. Can Google save itself? And these guys are computer guys. These are some of the original investors in AOL. They're original investors in Google. They're original investors in Tesla, and follow Elon Musk around whatever project he's doing. And they are trying to figure out whether Google can save itself. I put in the chat over there some key points, like Gemini, the new Google thing, was actually, for example, Gemini has praised essays in favor of abortion rights, but not those against. but this is the one I wanted to read. Gemini has also struggled to say whether Hitler or Elon Musk's tweets have been worse for society. AI attributed tweets to Hitler and tried to compare them with Musk tweets. Here's another one, is that similarly, the images created by Gemini chatbox generated inaccurate historical images of U.S. founding fathers and Nazi-era German soldiers. The images did not have any Caucasians in them. I mean, and here's what's amazing is that people are pushing to regulate AI, and the argument is to prevent this stuff. But the guys who own the companies right now, Sam Altman, these guys, are all maneuvering with Congress saying, yes, let's regulate AI. But they're doing so to create compulsory standards that new companies can't even compete in. So they're creating, so the legislation creates the monopolies that eliminate the competition. We have a really, really problem here. I love the fact that Bucky has been moving around this idea of scrap, which actually has been degenerated to junk, which is called recirculation. I think there shouldn't be scrap yards there, and there shouldn't be junk yards. There should be recirculation yards. When I drive by a junk yard, I just say, that's a recirculation yard, and start thinking in terms of sustainability and regenerative. Where is the comprehensivist in today's society? Where is a guy who looks back at history of the world and can give some prediction that's even moderate? We're creating legislation based on archaic ideas. And I got to do this, you guys. I want to show you this thing. I've presented this before, but this is so powerful. This is a price performance of computation chart from Ray Kurzweil. He started with the Turing machine back over here in 1945 with the invention of the first computer, with Alan Turing's first computer that broke the code. And just like Moore's law, of course, Gordon Moore didn't come into Intel until the 60s or 70s, but Moore's law shows what Kurzweil has been monitoring all along. And look, if we make decisions based on the science of 2000, we're at that red line right there. We're at the red line. And today is between 20 and 25. We should be up here at a blue line. Now, here's what's interesting. And this is where the human brain just gets left behind. This is a power of magnitude. In other words, computer knowledge in 2000 was at 10 trillion bits or whatever this is over here. Multiply that by 10, times 10 is 100, times 10 is 1,000, times 10 again is 100,000. Our capability of technology, of computers, is 100,000 times more powerful than it was in the year 2000. And I don't know of a human brain that can comprehend that. And we're doing everything based on past decisions. That is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. And we got guys like McConnell, who has just now announced he's the Republican head in the Senate. He's been in Congress for longer than anybody in history. He's like 82 years old. He's actually fallen asleep when he was presenting. And they actually came over and grabbed his shoulder and pulled him off everybody's focused on Biden, but very few people focus on this McConnell, who's finally said he's going to retire. We got guys who don't understand the computers of 2000, let alone the computers of 2020. And those are the people that are regulating our thing. It just boggles my mind. We need Kurzweil here is a good generalist. This is a guy that ought to be consulting Congress, and not these corporations who are trying to solidify their competitive head. It boggles my mind. I'm just so grateful for this study. I'm just so grateful for all of your guys' input and questions and opinions and insight. And wow, what a powerful conversation we have. And we've gone a little long tonight. We started a little bit beyond the appointed time. We've gone a little long. Thank you all for being patient, and for Joe for staying up so dadgum late. I think the sun is just coming up where Mono is. Is the sun come up yet, Mono?
Yeah, the sun has come up. You know, you
Oh,
can see that the light here in my office, which is south, you know, not sun exposed, is
very
light. But I was going to say, you know, from what you say, Steve,
yeah.
what is the value or the advice to our kids?
Mm.
To our what? To our kids?
Yeah, we advise, you know, based on experience. That's what it is. Society says, hey, you have been around for longer. You have been exposed for longer.
Yeah.
Let me help you, advising you to younger generation. What does it mean? You know, Ray Coswell, you know, and McConnell, you know, and what you say that because we were talking about obsolescence of experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You were
Obsolete
saying that if you make decision today based on your experience and your experience out of work with a normal trend of capabilities, yet the result will be those that are. So are we all, I don't know, you know, it leaves me again puzzled, you know, about
how
all
much
our values in society.
yeah, how much has Mitch McConnell learned about computers from the year 2000, 25 years ago, to today? I mean, how much has Mitch McConnell raised his brain power? Probably zero. And today our
No, it's gone
computers,
down.
it's probably gone down. Exactly right. And today
But
our
that,
computers are 100,000 times more powerful than they were when Mitch McConnell was at his peak.
Yeah. So it's when Ann's graduates end up in some of these positions, we'll see things different.
We'll see things different.
but will they be able to resist the sheer weight of our generation over them, of the parents, of society, and everything?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
And I'm just
Okay.
I've been looking at that Kurzweil chart, trying to figure out what it meant, and all of a sudden I heard about McConnell, and I looked at the 25-year gap at 100,000 times more powerful computers. Now, that doesn't mean incrementally we have 100,000, you know, bits of knowledge more, but we have that capability, and yet we're so far away from Buckminster Fuller's comprehensivist approach. It boggles my mind. And with that kind of computer power, we ought to be comprehensivist about every freaking thing.
But it also means, I mean, a guy that I've been following, Ray Dalio, you know, has been going through history.
Gotta go.
Okay.
Okay, Richard,
Thank you,
yes.
Richard. Good night.
Night.
Okay.
Good night, Richard.
So can I continue or will we?
Yeah, say
No.
your Ray Dalio thing. Let's finish.
Yeah, I was just saying that he's been continuing, he's been going back in history, 500 years, right? And
Yeah.
picking point of long-term cyclicity. You
Yeah.
remember, Steve, you always have fractals.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have longer things repeating, and you have discovering that. But the rate of cycle is kind of similar. And it's been picking things about the general economic and political situation that we live in the world today. That he picked up, Joe, how long? Maybe 5 years ago? Because his books came out like five,
Well,
10 years ago. But when you look at the scenarios that he had in his book, some of them are actually coming quite right, Steve. Joe, am I wrong?
absolutely. No, I mean, he and Nassim Taleb are both very, very accurate, have been very accurate in their predictions as to where we are.
Did you say Nassim?
No, Ray Dalio. Ray
Yeah,
Dalio.
Ray Dalio is as well, but both of them have been.
Who's the other one?
Not Nassim. It's Taleb.
Ray Dalio.
Taleb.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ray Dalio is the But yeah, with the New World Order book and his book on business cycles. And I have both of them here, I think. But no, he's been very accurate as to
Yeah, yeah, this one. One is principles,
I'm forgive, yeah, right.
and the other one is the changing world order.
Changing world order, that's it.
And then he went on to write another, I think I have another one, which is big cycles.
Big cycles.
This is big cycles.
And you can get that one right for free.
Big depth cycles. Quite interesting. And it has it linked in quite a bit, and it has some pretty interesting videos and interviews.
And he seems to have a real strong understanding of China in particular.
Yes,
Yeah.
he does, of China.
And that's what he seems that he actually understands international markets, but also specific. He seems to have a very very detailed understanding of China, perhaps more than anybody that I've heard. So no, I think that to your point earlier, Manu, and I think that this is really the most important point, is that a lot of these questions that we're starting to ask ourselves or having to ask ourselves, not only do they need to be more comprehensive, but they actually need to be more ethical and focused on meaning, as opposed to just focused on, and comes back to the idea of making sense instead of making money. But making sense is pursuing what is meaningful, I think. And I think that we really need to consider what that entails. And I think that needs to be part of curriculum more than anything else. Because I think that's the distinction between us and the number crunching machines that we're talking about in Bucky's book.
It's quite interesting when you say making sense or making money.
Right.
Sense takes time.
Right.
I think that one word that could have been also understood is immediate, the pursuit of immediate profit.
Right. As opposed
because yes. So the pursuit of immediate profit most of the time doesn't make sense.
And purpose is anything but immediate, meaning purpose is self-sustaining. It's I think, in a sense.
And I'm working to write this article at some point on the ontology of profit. The whole idea, if you ask anybody what's profit, it's what's left over. Well, to Bucky, there's nothing left over. When I do a process and there's something left over, that is energy that's supposed to go into the next system.
Right.
And if I hoard that energy, I'm breaking I'm breaking entropy. So
but
you
Steve, yes, you are frozen. I don't know.
Oh, I did freeze.
Yeah, you're still frozen on the picture
for some reason.
Okay, but what I was saying, that there is one thing that you forgot in the definition of it's not profit, wealth. Actually, it is in that when you talk over a cycle, yes, there's nothing left over. But in talking about phases of a cycle, there can be a smoothing of a curve that you call accumulation of leftovers. And that's what is called wealth. And wealth is cyclic also. It's accumulative, but cyclic. Does it make sense, Joe?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's cyclical.
Yeah.
And I think
because when you say profit is leftover, No, it's not. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the word profit shouldn't be used. Is that there is, after a certain cycle or subcycle, there will always be excesses.
Right. But the question is,
There will be pollution, right? That is more of reality.
I think that that's a very good distinction. You know, pollution is what is left over. And then what are you going to do with that pollution? What are you going to do with that excess?
Yes.
And I think that an interesting thing is to the idea that you have all these profits. They could be the end, the death of a company, because what happens is they stop innovating.
Yes.
They actually look at, even worse, acquiring companies, which is not the worst thing, but they look at acquiring companies, which is another problem in the sense that they purchase as a way of innovating. And that means they don't have a vision as to where the company needs to go next. It's that they've lost that edge.
Yes.
And by losing that edge, the pollution that they have is actually killing them. And so an example would be, there would be a lot of, people questioning as to why, particularly one example would be Apple. Why do they have so much cash on their balance sheet? And at one point when interest rates were zero, what are you keeping it for? It's pent up energy that needs to be, kind of directed. And if you're saying, I don't know what to do with it, well, then you should give it back to the shareholders or something. You should do something with it as opposed to just letting it sit there as energy that's kind of pent up. And no, and I think that and it doesn't mean and I had this conversation earlier, is that you don't spend haphazardly, but at the same time, you have to be thinking about what's next. And if you stop thinking about what's next, then well, then at that point, then you're no longer what you once were. You've become what Dodge and Chrysler and all those other companies that actually started had matured into. They matured into more of kind of established, I don't know, established order, kind of the establishment, so to speak.
Well, I think
Not focused on the creation.
you're missing one of my points. My big point is, Bucky points out here, there is no pollution. That what we see as pollution is energy that's left over for the next cycle. So when you talk about corporate profits, the question is, that's hoarding, unless those profits are applied to the next cycle.
Correct.
And I think that's what Bucky was all about with the critical path, was that, hey, the next cycle is abundance for everybody.
But
Let's get there.
I agree with you 100%. I think that that's why, and failure is part of that. But it's just,
Hey, you guys, we're 2 hours and 15 minutes into this thing, and it's not fair.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Okay, Steve. Was interesting.
Yeah, I had a
Then
good
you
time.
guys have a good time. All
All
right.
right.
I'll
And
see you.
good night sleep. To
Yeah.
Joe,
Thank you guys.
and then later to Steve.
All right.
Yeah, that's right. Good night,
See you
guys.
Good night,
All right.
everybody.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Have a good day.